Hi guys, Aceface back with another video for you, and this is going to be a narrative video. So I'm going to talk you through the history, the fluff, the background behind my custom chapter, The Emperor's Hands. So for some people this won't be very interesting, so apologies if this isn't your type of video, but for some people that are just interested in fluff and interested in where I got the idea for my Emperor's Hands chapter and how they work and what the flavour of them is, this might be of interest to you. So sit back, grab a cup of tea or something else that you want to drink, get your paintbrush and have a little listen. So the Emperor's Hands chapter, they are a founding chapter, so they're not a successor chapter, they are a brand new chapter, and they're new and are a completely Primus Marine based chapter, and they were founded by Gilliman very recently, so they are a brand new chapter. But their history does go way back, to the time of the Great Crusade. So what happened? Well, the Emperor's Hand originated from a moon, just from a planet called Paragon. The moon itself was called Ferrum, and as you might guess from the sounds of those names, yes, it was a Iron Hands space area. So it was predominantly an area that was owned, ran, however you want to talk about it, by the Iron Hands. And it was this particular area of Iron Hands territory was mainly industrial and semi-training as well. So quite a lot of training camps there. The majority of it was industrial. Now in particular, the moon of Ferrum did have quite a large training camp, and it was quite often used by up and coming Iron Hands, but also by Emperor's children. Of course, back in those days of the Great Crusade, there were no closer to legions than the Emperor's children and the Iron Hands, and Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim like nothing better than to pit their wits against each other and have their best recruits, best soldiers, take part in training, competitions and anything to hone their skills, taking a good chance to one-upmanship on each other. And Ferrum very much took place this type of thing quite a lot. So Ferrum was a big deal for the Iron Hands and for the Emperor's children back in those times. So the Great Crusade, as we know, kind of came to a bit of a volatile end, because just before its completion the heresy broke out. Now when the heresy broke out, it happened very suddenly for both those two chapters. So what happened, of course, both chapters, majority of their forces were engaged in actual missions, and obviously they collided in a huge battle when the forces of the Emperor's children turned to traitor, and that almighty battle between Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim, resulting in Fulgrim taking the head of the Iron Hands, Primarch himself. So while this was all happening back on the moon of Ferrum, very much the two chapters carried training. There was not very many of them, a few of the elders who couldn't really more tacticians, more really up to the training and facilitating the next crop of super soldiers from these two chapters, and also some of the up and coming soldiers of course as well, partaking in some state-of-the-art warfare training. And while the tragic death of their Primarch, the Iron Hands and the Emperor's children were completely unaware of the events, mainly because they were cut off by warp storms, by the trickery of chaos around that time. So the message of what had happened did not come to the moon of Ferrum. And in fact, as the heresy continued to, through years and years of war, wreck its way through the galaxy, eventually obviously finishing off in a humongous battle at the gates of Terra. But while this was happening, unaware of this, of course frustrated with the lack of communication, but you know, it was not unusual in the days of the Great Crusade for missions to go on for years. So they were not completely worried, slightly concerned the communication was gone, but they carried on what they did best, which was train and get up to speed. The elders carried on getting older, became weary but not losing their killer instinct and all the training that had taken place over the many millennia. So once the heresy had come to its conclusion and the traitors dashed back to the Eye of Terror, what was left of them, to regroup and plot their next mission to try and take control of the galaxy, and the loyalists fractured, some of them particularly depleted, all started to try and make sense of what was left over from this very, very brutal war that had taken place over so many years. When what was left of the Iron Hands, a Primarch-less, fairly fractured chapter, then no longer a legion, came back to its kind of worlds to try and find out what was going on. When they did come back close to the planet of Paragon and more importantly for this story, the moon of Ferrum, of course it suddenly hit them. Some of those warriors, the high up captains, were aware of what was still left there on Ferrum. At first slightly worried of what would potentially happen, because there was still a fairly large group of traitors that were on that moon, busily going about their own business, training and honing their skills, but still traitors nonetheless. Had the message got through to them? They weren't really too sure. They thought, how could it? If they hadn't got through to the Iron Hands, and then they wouldn't have got through to the Emperor's children. The message came through from the Imperial Palace and from the High Lords of Terra that actually, with traitors still alive and well on a loyalist world of any sort, the only way that it could be dealt with was to delete that moon from existence, bombard it from space and delete it. Yes, there would be casualties from the Iron Hands, but actually that was something that had to take place, because could that seed of corruption have spread to the Iron Hands over so many years of them together? So at the time, a senior member of the Iron Hands, the chapter master at the time, made a very calculated decision. He wasn't going to have this happen. So against his direct commands, he decided not to call that command and bombard one of his many commanding planets and moons. So because of that, the moon stayed there. So did the planet. The Iron Hands then had a decision of what to do at this particular time. Did they go down themselves, try and separate these two old legions, if you like? Did they try and execute the traitors there and then? They really were not too sure. In fact, for months on end, they still left this moon completely isolated from the home worlds, because they were just not too sure what to do and what they were exactly gonna come find if they did make planetfall. In the end, they decided to go down to the moon to investigate what happened, and as expected, when they did make planetfall, both the Emperor's children and the Iron Hands absolutely greeted their friends, brethren, with open arms, concerned of what had happened, not aware of what had unfolded over the many years. When the stories unfolded and they told them exactly what happened, both old legions, both old warriors, refused to believe it. They would not believe, the Emperor's children would not believe that their Primarch had turned to chaos. At first not even believing that chaos was even in existence. So to believe such absolute heresy, they could not come to believe it. They would not accept it. And the Iron Hands could not for 1 second believe that their lord, their father, their Primarch had been slain by one of his brothers, and slain in fact at all. Absolute in denial. They refused to believe. Any amount of evidence was not enough for them to come to terms with what happened. So the Iron Hands senior officers had a choice to make at that point. They were not able to reason with their brothers, with their colleagues. So what they decided to do was, instead of doing what they were told to do and delete and execute these traitors now, refusing to believe the imperial truth, but instead they tasked them with more training, more exercises, more use of new equipment, learning the ways, absolutely making sure that they tapped into every resource they could possibly take from these elders. They still sent over people for training, but it was very much a secret. It was a secret, and as slowly but surely the moon itself started to fade, its stories, its legacy was failing, apart from a very small group of elders from both chapters, from both legions, still resolute, still stoic, still believing what they felt was the truths, carried on believing, carried on fighting, and carried on training. Now this went on for many years, a secret from the Imperium, a bit of a dirty secret for the Iron Hands, not something that they would share with their fellow Space Marines from other chapters. It was very much something that they were ashamed of, but at the same time felt that they did the right thing. Those Empress children had done nothing wrong. They had not been corrupted. They had not fallen to chaos. And actually possibly the safest place for them was to hide in secret, away from potential what would come of them if they were known to be traitors. So then we go on many years into the future, many years, many wars, many crusades, and we come to the awakening of Guilliman. So as we know, once Guilliman fought off and defended his home world and started to get a grip on the Imperium, started to make some ground, and started to turn the tide of what happened with the fractures of the galaxy caused by Magnus, caused by Abaddon and the fall of Cadia, and all that fell from there, all the great battle that commenced from that point. But obviously Guilliman now had a little bit of a hold on things, still very fractious, still a lot up in the air. But what Guilliman was doing was going around making sure that this newest form of Space Marine, the Primus Space Marine, was shared with his brothers, with his children, with his colleagues from other chapters, to make sure that the strength of the Primus Marine was shared throughout the Imperium to support the defence of their worlds. When Guilliman made Planetfall, the stories, the legends started to hear the whispers. Obviously Guilliman, with almost a godlike presence about him, could hear the whisperings and the murmurs, the legends of Paragon, and particularly Ferrum. He asked many of the senior officers and could tell, again with his wisdom, with the the gene seeds that had been passed on by his father, by that kind of almost psychic presence that he possessed. He could tell that there was something more. Once he found out, he demanded to go to the world himself, to go to Ferrum, to meet these elders and to find out whether this was a reality. So he took a group of his most senior officers of the Ultramarines and he made planetfall to Ferrum. Of course, he was met by the elders. The elders absolutely bent down to Guilliman. He was a Primarch. He was somebody that they truly would respect, that they would listen to, and that what he said would ultimately be the truth. So at that point, Guilliman did spend many weeks discussing and talking through the great tragedies and the stories of the heresy, even talking in detail about how his brother had absolutely taken the Primarch himself back to close to death. And at this point, when the Emperor's children and the Iron Hands could see in the face of Guilliman that this was the truth, this was a reality, that actually it was not just rumours, it was not just some crazy story, that in fact what had happened was the truth. At that point, the Emperor's children burst into tears. They could not hold their emotion any longer. They realised what their father, what their Primarch had done, not only to the galaxy, but to even another Primarch. Not just one Primarch, but more than one Primarch. And at that point they bent their knee to Guilliman, pledging their souls, saying, please take our lives if that is the right decision for the Imperium. We do not want to be anything to do with this absolute heresy, with this traitor world. We don't want anything to do with that. Guilliman could see the pure anger and the pure, absolute, complete lack of life in these Emperor's children, and the fact that everything had drained from them, knowing that truth. He also looked at his Iron Hands sons and could see again that same sadness, realising that the reality was their Primarch was taken out in his prime by another of his brothers. So they too pledged their soul and their alliance to Guilliman. Obviously at this point, this group of soldiers, this group of elders, were far from their legions, from their chapters, very much almost working alone. Their teachings, their training, so much different from what was currently taking place. Guilliman saw this as an opportunity. He saw it as an opportunity of millennia had passed. The two chapters, the two legions had integrated so tightly. They had learned so many absolute fantastic skills that made them in some ways better than any other Space Marine around, that any other Imperium could learn so much from this particular group of elders. He saw it as an absolute opportunity to unleash the Primus Marines, to give this world, this tragic moon, a chance to rebirth in what better way than in a new chapter, in a new legacy, something that come out of the ashes of such tragedy to become a force to be reckoned with, something to repay what happened to both these chapters, to both these elders. Of course, by this point, the Emperor's hands were totally and utterly sold by Guilliman's teachings, by his word, and pretty much just wanted to be Ultramarines. Guilliman saw different. He could see that the gene seed in these soldiers were different. They wouldn't just be Ultramarines. He couldn't just get these soldiers to wear blue and to be Ultramarines in Primus armour. He knew that this was something different. This was a different chapter. He knew that he could absolutely instill the teachings and his codex amongst them, but they would ultimately be different soldiers. They would ultimately be their own warriors. So after that, for many months, many months in fact, both Guilliman and his most trusted, most experienced soldiers and officers trained the elders and started to recruit onto this planet, onto this moon, a new, unique chapter. Much work, much training, but eventually not only was coming out a group of soldiers that were completely trained and efficient in every part of warfare within the Ultramarines skill set, but also had an inbuilt, embedded and inbred skill of fighting at a high class standard from the Emperor's children, but also a grit, a determination, and an absolute resolute honour from the Iron Hands. And with a combination of these three legions, these three chapters, these three great names from the past and from the future, rose the Iron Hands. And not just the Iron Hands, rose the Emperor's hands. So after these many months passed, and these soldiers were now ready to start to serve the new Imperial Lord, Guilliman himself, there was one last thing to do before Guilliman decided to leave the world and to go on with his crusade, with his mission, with what he needed to do. The elders decided to meet with Guilliman one last time, and on this occasion many words were passed, many words of wisdom, much talk, much amusement as these great warriors became very close. The elders presented Guilliman with a white helmet. This white helmet was a symbol for Guilliman. Whenever he called for his new chapter, the Emperor's Hands, he pledged that he would wear this white helmet to match the elders and his new formed chapter in a mark of honour for his brothers. He would also fight in this white helmet, and that ever since has been the legacy of this chapter, that whenever Guilliman calls for the Emperor's Hands, whenever he needs that set of expertise, whenever he wants that particular skill and that particular gene seed, and he fights by their side, they fight in the name of the Ultramarines, but they also fight in the name of the Emperor's Hands, and in turn Guilliman will wear that helmet as a sign of honour for his new chapter. So our story now is almost at an end, but of course nothing is ever as simple as that, nothing ever goes as smoothly as that, and of course the Emperor's children were still amongst this group of warriors, and even though they had pledged their souls, their alliance, every last bit of themselves to this new chapter and to Guilliman, they're still Emperor's children. And many times they can still hear the call from their Primarch. It's still secret, no one's aware of it, but that call comes. Fulgrim wants his warriors back, and he will do anything he can to twist, to turn, to play with their emotions, to eventually get his brothers back, to bring them to the side of chaos, to get them to fight under his banner again. Those whispers, those corruptions are still rife within this new chapter. Guilliman knows nothing of it, but it's there. Will they be able to fight those urges, those chaotic calls? Will they be able to fight them back? or will one day the Emperor's hands turn just so as their brothers many years ago? And that's where we leave this story, guys. So hopefully you've enjoyed that and you get an idea of how this chapter works, why they are Ultramarines sometimes, why they are Iron Hands sometimes, and why sometimes I'll use a different chapter altogether to show their kind of Emperor's Children style fighting. So hope you enjoyed it. Really interested to hear your comments. Hopefully it's your type of video. If it's not, apologies. And normal service will resume very soon. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care. Bye bye for now.